Well, the audio works. That's good. Okay, and we're all familiar with that. So, without further ado, we might as well get underway, and while people are talking, we can sort out the rest of it. So, welcome to the, what day is it today?
3rd. Do I have to go back a slide?
Yeah, well,
July 3rd.
Okay, the June 3rd, 2011 issue of I guess the general meeting, or the meeting of the Royal Astronomical Society, the Ottawa chapter, Ottawa section. We've got a fairly full program for you tonight, which is the main reason why I'm concerned about starting a little bit late. But anyway, what we're going to do tonight, we'll have Dr. Al Scott will give us the astronomy news. We're going to follow that with observations tonight. So we're going to do the observation sections a little early. That's because some of the observers have to get to bed early. So, you know, we have to do that. Next up, Sarah MacLeod will be giving us a bit of an overview of her recent observation of the shuttle launch. Should be very interesting. We'll take our break, and then we have Graham Hay telling us about the activities on International Astronomy Day. Roman is going to speak to us about astronomy and the law, a topic I haven't seen covered here before. And Rolf Meyer is going to continue with his recent series of what I did on my astronomy vacation with a visit to the VLA, which should be very interesting. VLA, Very Large Array, right?
That's the one.
Yep. For those of you who didn't already know, which is probably nobody except the kids. But anyway. Without further ado, then, we'll flip forward to Dr. Al Scott and the astronomy news. Welcome. The mic's not working well, so you'll have to use this.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So the first item I'd like to discuss is shockwaves in space. This is a relatively neat image from the ESA, the European Space Agency's Herschel observatory up in space. Taken by its PAX camera. It's a broadband infrared imager. And this is this satellite is looking at space in really long wave infrared. So this is like 60 to 100 microns. It's a sort of radiation you get from very cold dust in outer space. And this telescope is giving us the most high resolution images yet in these wave bands, in these longer wave bands. What we're seeing is the dust clouds in space. And the discovery that I want to talk about is that they've looked at the interstellar clouds of dust between the stars, and that's what this is actually in the constellation of Aquila. They have networks of gaseous filaments in them. And the discovery that Herschel has made, the astronomers working with Herschel, is that each of these filaments is approximately the same width, about a third of a light year in diameter, and tens of light years long. And what that means is that they basically are formed by the same sort of mechanisms. And what they've also discovered is that newly born stars are being formed in these filaments. And if you look closely at this, you can see some small collapsed objects dotting the filaments, which are actually newborn stars in these collapsed bits of dust. So why are these filaments all the same width, and what is forming them, and why are they giving birth to new stars? Well, you can compare the observations with computer models, and that's what the astronomers have done. And they conclude that these were formed in shockwaves in space. And in fact, they're sonic shockwaves, like a sonic boom traveling through the interstellar medium. And this is coming from supernova, when stars explode and deposit energy into the very the vacuum of space. The dust isn't very dense, even if you're in those filaments. Except where the stars are being formed, there's not a lot of matter. But from far away, it looks really dense. And these things are being formed like shockwaves, like a sonic boom in interstellar space. And in fact, because they're extremely cold, they're about 10 Kelvin above absolute zero, the speed of sound is actually slower than it is at ground level on Earth. It's only about 200 meters per second in those clouds. So it's kind of neat that they're actually discovering the mechanisms that form these embryonic solar systems.
Where's
So-
your
I went out on a limb a little bit and challenged the technical guys. This is an interesting and fun thing that I found on the internet, actually. There's a doctoral student at University of Victoria, Alex Parker, who's put together there's the earth-shattering kaboom.
There's the earth-shattering kaboom.
He's put together a supernova sonata from 3 years of observations from the Canada, France, Hawaii telescope. They've been looking at 4 frames of deep space and monitoring these type 1A supernovae. Can you go to the next one? That was the CFHT. And what he's done is he's put it to music, which is kind of an interesting way to show the information. So the video is a compilation of 241 type 1A supernovae seen in the CFHT legacy survey fields. The animation is going to be rendered at 15 frames a second, and each frame corresponds to just under a single day of observations. So the 4 frames cover roughly 16 times the full moon on the sky, or 1/10,000th of the entire sky. And so what he's done is he's taken some physical properties of the supernova and put them to music. So the volume corresponds to the distance that the supernova is from us. So the quieter the sound, the further away it is, the louder it is, the closer it is. The pitch of the note is based on what's called the Phrygian dominant scale, and it's related to the speed that the supernova brightens and then dims in the data. So he's taken that, what's called the stretch of the supernova, and put it to music. And then he's chosen the instrument based on the mass of the host galaxy. So for large host galaxies, it's a stand-up bass, and for smaller host galaxies, it's a grand piano. So let's see if this comes through. Okay, that's it. Thank you for waiting. Oh.
So does this guy's boss know what he's up to during working hours?
Probably. So just a couple final words. We're also looking for volunteers to support in our remotely...
Amusement park rides are big business. In Williamsburg, Virginia, Bush...
I have no idea what that is.
Oh, that was interesting, I must say.
This gets better and better.
Go ahead. I need a partition here.
We've decided to bring in advertisements to raise money for the Smart Scope. And we're also looking for volunteers to help out with our remote-controlled observatory we're trying to bring online this year. It's out at David Florida Labs at Shirley's Bay. And we're also looking for volunteers to help out if you're a member of the club or if you would like to be a member with the Telescope Loan Library, which I run. We're looking for people that would be interested in helping out, so thank you.
So So without further ado, we'll get into the observation reports. And first off, Chris and I were looking at each other the other night and going, who sent this in? And neither of us could remember, but
Bob Olson.
was it Bob Olson? Okay, thank you, Bob Olson. He's probably not here, but nevertheless, thank you. This is rather an interesting shot from the solar observatory, the orbiting one. What it catches is a comet plunging into the sun and a huge CME at the same moment. Now, the comet didn't actually cause that. It's a coincidence, you know. But it's pretty cool, isn't it? Look at that. Is that amazing or what? So that's the fate of quite a few comets. You know, they don't all come in on a nice grazing course and loop around the sun and head back out. Some of them get it a little too close to the bullseye and they don't come out the other side. And so that's where some of the hydrogen comes from. Okay, next up, Paul Commission, and I'll just bring the mic over for you.
It's okay, I don't need a microphone.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Thank you, Paul.
We used to conduct these meetings without screens, so you can imagine. This is NGC 185 in Cassiopeia. It's part of the Andromeda group of galaxies. This particular one, the reason I'm showing this is it's an an elliptical, but it's a peculiar type of galaxy. You notice there's a large dust cloud right on the northwest edge of the galaxy there. Right, that's it. Yes, it's one of these peculiar objects. Unfortunately, I have to show you old pictures. My observatory is down and I don't think I'll be showing anything for a while anything new. Next, please. This is the old bubble. I just realized the other day, I'd never shown this. This is also in Cassiopeia. This is the bubble nebula. You'll notice it's pretty hard. Yeah, this is an exposure of 20 minutes with the 14-inch telescope, and you can just see the fill in there on the bubble. This is an interesting object, and I would advise you to, if you can, try to see it. There's a lot of nebulosity, as you notice there, north of the thing, quite a bit. That's not in the bubble itself, but that's a large nebulous object. Next, please. This is NGC 7678. This is in Pegasus. This thing is very similar to NGC 6946, which is in Cygnus. This is an ARP object. This is ARP 28. The other is ARP 29. The reason that it's an ARP object, it's peculiar. It has one extremely heavy, you see at the bottom there's an extremely heavy arm. So this is rated as a peculiar object. That's why I like to show you things that are sort of off the beaten path, not things that you see all the time. So this is one that is similar to the 6946. Thanks.
So is that heavy arm a result of a great deal of starburst activity, Paul? Or?
It could be that. They think that it could be starburst. It's just it's not a what you would call a standard. When they in classification, this is odd.
Fair enough. Next up. Thank you, Paul. Okay, who's the next one up? Oh, yes, Gordon and Julia. Here you go, Gordon. Yep.
Well, a few months ago, there was a comment made that all the presentations here presenters seem to have gray hair. So Julia decided that after her second birthday, she'd come up and do a presentation. Here she is at the telescope. What were you looking at, honey? Say it loud.
Moon.
Yeah, and what did the moon look like?
Moon.
Big.
Big moon.
Big moon. And that's the moon we were looking at, and I'm sure Brian can identify all the craters there along the rim. That was just taken with a point-and-shoot camera mounted at the eyepiece. Okay, and next, Julia, what else did you look at?
Big moon.
Yeah, big, and what's that? Did you see the Big Dipper?
Big people.
And what did the Big Dipper look like?
Wow.
And this is the sketch that Julia did of the Big Dipper. Okay. So after Julia went to bed, Daddy got to play a little bit. And I did M58 in Virgo, which is it's a barred spiral galaxy, and I don't know what magnitude it is. I looked in about 4 different places. 2 of them listed it at 9.5 or 9.7, and one of them listed it at 10.5 and the other at 11. Anyway, there it is. It's a barred spiral, a really bright core. And the next one is M109. I live right across the highway from Place d'Orleans Shopping Center, so light pollution's a real issue. And some of the objects that I should be able to see with an 8-inch telescope are challenged. M109 is one of them. I've been looking for 3 years, and I finally spotted it. This is an Ursa Major, which is not to be confused with Ursa Bell's Cornurus. Okay. It also is a barred spiral. Yes, dear. And it's quite a bit fainter than M58. Anyway, that's it. Thank you. Say good night. Good night.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. Next up, Rolf, and quite a few lunar observations.
I think that was the first, eh?
Thanks, Bill. Okay, first of all, this first slide is a lie because the first picture is actually the moon in June. So, the first slide. So this was actually taken last night. Hope you can all see the moon there. The moon here was 28 hours old. Now, I don't know if anybody here went to see the eclipse. Did you know there was an eclipse the day before? And I think it was visible in the Maritimes and Northern Ontario, Northern Quebec. Did anybody go? No, nobody went to see this fantastic eclipse. Anyway, so this was probably very close to being a fairly new moon to like when you have an eclipse, that's about as new as the moon can get. And this 28 hours later is was still pretty hard to see. Okay, so that was last night. Be more prominent over the next few weeks. Okay, and now here, this is okay. So the people in the front are going to be in for a treat. So this is actually
Tell me when you want to start.
okay. So this is actually a single picture. Okay, just keep in mind that this is one picture. So okay, if we could just start that.
Wow. Is that a Zoom IPC?
Okay, so that was one single picture taken with a DSLR. Okay, the next one, again, this is one picture. Chris needs a slightly faster computer, but other than that, it's not too bad, I guess. So, okay, that's it.
Not my night.
Oh, there we go. Well, thank you for that, Rolf. Next up is Bob here.
Yep.
Ah, there he is. Here you go, Bob.
I tend to do my imaging and observing by looking at Starry Night and going to, in the computer program, the part of the sky that I can see at night. And I have a good view of the east and from the south to the east. So I'm looking along and I find this the laser?
Yep, big button.
Yeah. I find that this galaxy and this galaxy in Starry Night are labeled as lost galaxies. And this was too much for me. So I gave them 2 hours of exposure. And it turns out that this galaxy right here, which is the 4535, was studied by the Hubble, and they looked at a bunch of Cepheid variables in it, which allow them to tell how far away it is. It turns out to be 52 million light years away. So they know this one fairly accurately, within, I think, 3 million light years. Okay, next one. Now, when you turn your camera on and leave it for 2 hours, you can have some other things go through it. And so I took out the individual frames that had satellites going through it, and this is what I ended up with. The software I use will actually eliminate these. You can actually use these frames, but every time I do, I must be doing it wrong, because then I end up with little faint tracks across some images. So I just basically eliminate those frames that have the satellites. Okay, next one. This is M101, and you're looking at over 10 hours of exposure for this picture. And you say to yourself, oh boy, that's guy's got a lot of willpower. No, he's just forgetful. It turns out that 5 hours is not significantly better than 10 hours is not significantly better than 5 hours when you're trying to get a good picture. And so I forgot that I'd imaged it the night before, which is really clever. And then I went to bed.
I have a question. When you look at M101 in the sky, if it was bright enough, would it be a patch of sky bigger than the moon?
No. I think the moon would mostly fill this whole thing, this whole frame. So this particular image, I don't think is. And then for 10 hours, you get a ton of stuff going through it. These are actually individual frames. This thing was going through a little slower than the other ones. This is really bright, and it's one of those one of them was wobbling. And I don't know if you can see it in the frame. No. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much.
Let me see.
Yes.
Yes, there's one.
There we go.
Okay, and now for something completely different. In my other life, I direct traffic on the de-icing pad at the Ottawa airport. Let's see, where are we here? Okay, good. And I call this the image, the $1 million image that I missed, unfortunately. But this is a cold morning in February. That's Venus. And the most beautiful crescent moon was rising just through the, right over the terminal. Now, when the airplanes leave, we just had them going over to the west, runway 14, that's 140 degrees magnetic. And I was watching them, and every one was taking off right through the moon. I said, wow. And of course, I didn't have a tripod out, didn't have a video camera, but unfortunately, if that got sucked into a 767, it would cost a few bucks. But next one, please. This is the well-known but hard to observe constellation, A320 Airbus. I tried to get it as it was hitting the moon, but of course, directing traffic and everything, I just had a quick pick, and this was actually through the windshield, so we did all right. But it was a great show that morning, I'll tell you. It was good. And finally, the next one. I just wanted to illustrate the effects of a -26 magnitude star on the atmosphere of an Earth-like planet. It's a little bit warmer now, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, next up, Sarah is going to talk to us about her trip down to see the latest shuttle launch.
Hi, as he said, my name is Sarah MacLeod. I'm a Navy officer, and I like a little bit of space observation on my free time. And for the numbers man in the audience somewhere, I can't see him. My first ship was 280. That would be very good. My last was 330. Very good. He's good.
Mine was a shot a year.
It's a different era.
Good comeback.
I can't see you. So Roger Roll Endeavour is the name of my presentation. Those who have seen shuttle launches before know that that's the call that Houston gives to the space shuttle once it's rolled on its back and started its journey up into orbit. It was the call that I was looking forward to hearing for 3 long months through several delays and scrubs, and we finally got to hear it, and a dream came true. I'll start with kind of a neat photo. My mom sent me a photo last night. The photo on the left, that's 8-year-old me in 1983 at Kennedy Space Center with Space Shuttle Challenger on the launch pad for STS-6, only the 6th shuttle mission in history. And on the right-hand side, of course, is much older me and my 10-year-old son standing in front of Endeavour, which of course was the space shuttle that was, or the orbiter that was built to replace Challenger after the disaster in 1986. We didn't stage that photo. I'd forgotten that the first photo existed. It's just kind of neat that 2 generations and counting, 3 I suppose, because my mom's taking the picture there on the left. So it's a neat photo. Same location, you can see the same road in the background. Okay, I'll just wait here 1 second. I just want to make a point about the difference between, I do have an agenda here tonight, and it's to try to convince someone in the audience to go and see the last space shuttle launch. Great, I'm so glad to hear that. As the last photo showed you, it crosses generations and it inspires a real love of space and a love of learning that you don't get in the classroom. The difference between watching a launch on TV and watching it in person, I could compare to the difference between watching a Sens game at home on the couch or out at the bank. Celebrating a goal at home with your dog isn't the same as standing up and cheering for with 20,000 of your closest friends. Of course, on the upside, you don't have to put up with Leafs fans if you're sitting on your couch at home, trash-talking Alfie all night. A better example for this crowd might be finding that ring nebula, which is not really that hard to find, but when you're first starting out, everything but the moon is pretty hard to find. So you see the spectacular photos in the coffee table book from the Hubble telescope. You finally find the ring nebula through your telescope. You drag your family out and say, look, take a look. And they say, what am I looking at? Is it that smudge that I'm not really sure I can see? And you say, yes, isn't it spectacular? And that's going to see a space shuttle launch in person. There's lots of great stuff online and there's lots of great stuff on TV, but nothing compares to the real thing. And if we could play the video now.
Take 5.
Love that sound. It sounds like some animal.
Firing chain is armed. House suppression water system is armed. All remaining to start. 8, 7, 6, 4, 3, 2, 0, and liftoff for the final launch of Endeavour, expanding our knowledge, expanding our lives in space.
Roger roll, Endeavour.
Houston is now controlling.
That's the first of 3 videos I'm going to show tonight. And thank you, Chris, for getting it fixed, because if it didn't work, I'm going to have to get my son to act out the videos. And it's not as spectacular. So why should you go see it? Because it's your last chance coming up in just over a month. The end is in sight. The Space Shuttle program is ending, and you might be wondering why is it ending? Number of reasons. The recommendations made after the Columbia disaster, number of recommendations, but basically it was said that the Space Shuttle is just too dangerous and it cannot continue. Political aspects, who wants to be the president that actually shuts down the Space Shuttle program? Not me. Maybe Barack Obama was brave to do it, I'm not sure, history will tell. And maybe it is time for renewal, because sometimes change can only come catastrophically and not a little bit at a time. This is a statement that President Obama said, and for people familiar with the history of spaceflight, it bears a startling similarity to a statement made by Kennedy about going to the moon in the early 1960s. And of course, they made it came true, so I hope that comes true. For the kids in the audience, by the way, Most astronauts are in their 30s and 40s, so you are perfectly situated to be among the first astronauts to go to Mars. Anyone over the age of probably 20, it's probably not going to happen.
It'll be Julia.
So these are two shots from Endeavour, which is now forever my spaceship, and Callum's. The left picture is the crew shot, the serious crew shot. The right picture is the fun crew shot. They do this for every launch. And of course, you might recognize that right-hand picture from Star Trek, the most recent version. Commander Mark Kelly, obviously, playing Captain Kirk. And I think to the right, you can see pilot Gregory Johnson, the eyebrows. I think he's playing the role of Spock.
Before you move on, is there someone else you see in that right-hand image? Advance to the next slide here.
Oh. I didn't put that in.
Thank you.
God help us.
Just to give you my launch experience in a brief blurb, I followed the processing of Endeavour from the time Discovery launched in February, and I followed it pretty closely from that point on because I made the decision to go, and I took a big interest in it. Endeavour became known as a reluctant orbiter. There was no major issues during our preparation, but a series of small delays. Launch was set for 18th of April. It slipped to the 29th due to a traffic jam at the ISS. On a sad note, there was actually a suicide at the launch pad while Endeavour was at the pad. It was a United Space Alliance worker. And it should be noted that the end of the space shuttle program is putting tens of thousands of people out of work, and that's just the contractors. The effects on the areas around Kennedy Space Center, unknown, but it'll be significant. So it's a sad time, as well as a triumphant time for NASA. As well, another note about this launch, Commander Mark Kelly, of course, is the husband of U.S. Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, who was the victim of an attempted assassination in January in a sort of a miraculous survival story. She was there on the 29th of April on the first launch date. President of the U.S. Was there. That was the weekend that Osama bin Laden was killed, so I guess that was him trying to act casual. But all that to say, everything seemed to be coming together so well. It was a fairy tale. There was no way it couldn't go off if the president was there. The astronauts got in their van. They headed out to the launch pad. We got in our buses to go to the viewing area. And then the Astrovan stopped. Someone got out, someone got back in, and the Astrovan did a U-turn and headed back to the astronauts' accommodation building. A technical issue forced a scrub 4 hours prior to launch, and 1 million people, that's how many people showed up for Endeavour, went home heartbroken. Some would come back on the 16th, and I was lucky. I was blessed to be among that group that came back on the 16th. I saw some of the same faces on my bus, actually. Others could not because they used their vacation time. They couldn't afford to go back. There's people from all over the world in line with me there. Australia, Europe, everywhere. And for some, it was a dream that went unrealized. And I say this to warn you, space flight is not for the faint-hearted, even if you're just a space flight observer. So that sets the stage for Atlantis, STS-135, the 135th flight, currently targeted for not earlier than July 8th. They're going to keep saying that. You're going to hear them say not earlier than. It won't become the official launch date until the Flight Readiness Review meeting on June 28th. So you want to watch your sources when that date rolls around. You can view space shuttle launches from a lot of different places. Obviously, you recognize the Magic Kingdom, Disney World, about an hour west of Kennedy Space Center. So on a clear night, you can actually see the shuttle from the entire area. The bottom right-hand side, that's from an aircraft, obviously. That's the half of the Endeavour's launch that I did not get to see because I was under that cloud. That is from a NASA observation or a reconnaissance plane, but you probably saw it in the news, there was a few people in commercial flights that were lucky enough to get snaps of that as well. The airport doesn't shut down during the launches, there's just a standoff area around the airport. So some people are very lucky, but I would not plan to have that be your space shuttle viewing trip because that's pretty lucky. And of course in the upper right-hand corner, you can always see it up in the sky. That is a shot of Discovery. Discovery is the dimmer light, and the International Space Station is the brighter. And you can find that when it's going to pass overhead quite easily. Just Google ISS viewing Ottawa, and it's the first thing that comes up. Optimal viewing, really the best view is without a doubt from Kennedy Space Center. Again, that's an hour east of Orlando in Florida. From good, better, best point of view, you've got Astronaut Hall of Fame. Better is the visitor complex. It's closer, but the view line is obstructed by the trees, so you only see it after it's lifted off from the pad. And of course, the best view is the NASA Causeway, and that's where we were lucky to get tickets to see it from. Of course, escalating costs and escalating demand as you go up. Oh, sorry, I want to go back and that was a photo that my son took. That is the big bird on the pad, of course, and there's a Bonaparte gull. I'm not very good with distinguishing one seagull from another. My time in the Navy didn't teach me that, but that was a pretty extraordinary picture to get. And that's what you see from the Causeway. And that's a point-and-click camera. That is not a big zoom lens, so you get a direct view back on to the Launch Pad 39 Alpha. It's extraordinary. With your bare eye, you can see the red of the external tank. Okay, that's a little map of Kennedy Space Center. Orlando Disney World would be over here. Just up in the corner, that's sort of the mainland. Astronaut Hall of Fame is back here on the mainland before you cross this big causeway. Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex is down here at the corner. And this is the NASA Causeway here. So this is your direct line of view over to Launch Pad 39 Alpha. The VAB, this is how you orient yourself there. The VAB is that big gravestone-like building. It's just huge, and you can see it from 10 miles away. I just mentioned the Causeway is the closest you'll get, unless you're a journalist, if you've married an astronaut or given birth to one. So that's the closest a normal human can get. So getting Causeway tickets, there's 3 ways to do it. There's directly from Kennedy Space Center. There's through authorized resellers. I'll talk a bit more about each of these. And there's through unauthorized resellers. So that's people whose plans have changed. They can't use their tickets. And of course, the scalpers. There's always scalpers. And just this photo, I just mentioned the VAB. This is a photo that someone took from the roof of the VAB. So you can see each little block there is a tour bus. I count about 30 of them in a row there, and there's 3 columns deep. That's how many, and so each tour bus with more than 100 people, that's about 9,000 to 10,000 people there on the Causeway. You can't tell, but we're packed in there pretty good. So we'll start with the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex Lottery. NASA, obviously, is the big organization. It subcontracts the visitor complex out to another organization. So when you go online to try to find this, I have the link in the bottom. I think they post these briefings somewhere. You're looking for Kennedy Space Center, not NASA. And you look under the events banner, and you're going to find this. It's open right now. It closes, I think, Sunday June 5th at 5 p.m. You're not disadvantaged by entering later in the game. You can go home and enter tonight, and you stand as much a chance of winning as anyone. That said, it is a lottery, and your chances of winning aren't really that significantly improved by entering the lottery. They are still slim to none. There's probably going to be in excess of 1 million people. This is the last launch, so there will be perhaps millions of people applying for tickets, and thousands will be handed out. So many people that are applying online will be the scalpers. That's just the way it is. If you do join, sign up for the lottery. Remember to check your junk box, because very often emails back from Kennedy Space Center get deflected into your junk box, and people never hear. If you're successful, you'll get an email a week or so later telling you to come back at a certain time to a given link to register or to buy your tickets. There will be several waves until all the tickets are gone, and at which point they'll advise everyone whether they were successful or not. So you will know whether you win or not by about 2 weeks after the close time. The next one is probably your better chance of getting tickets if you're interested. Florida Dolphin Tours, Gator Tours. I went with Florida Dolphin, but I don't think there's any appreciable difference between the two. They're big tour bus companies that do all sorts of different tours in the Orlando area, and they have daily runs out to Kennedy Space Center as well. Kennedy Space Center only has so many parking spaces, and this is why they give some of their tickets away to Florida Dolphin and Gator Tours. They park as many cars as they can of people through their direct lottery, and then the rest of the tickets they give to Gator and Dolphin and say, fill your boots. I should say that through Kennedy Space Center Direct, the tickets are about $60. Through one of these authorized resellers, they're about $170. And if you go through the scalper, you're probably looking at $600 to $700 per ticket. So NASA is not trying to make a killing here. They're just trying to cover the costs, and they really want average people to be able to get out and see these launches. Sales are done only through the internet for these two companies. Competition is fierce. You got to be lucky. You have to sign up for alerts through their two websites. Follow them on Facebook and Twitter because they'll start to give heads up when they're going to open sales on Facebook and Twitter first. And the stark reality is that you're going to have to plan to take a day off work if it's going on sale when you're at work because it is computer-based, and so 50, 60,000 people will start trying to buy tickets at the same time. Everybody will hit refresh at the same time, and it will crash, so you will be frustrated for a long time. Many people spend 3, 4, 5 hours trying to get tickets. Maybe you'll get lucky and get it right away. Good luck. So as I said, about 170. Traffic can be bad. The 1-hour trip from Kennedy Space Center after a big launch like this can turn into a 7-hour trip on the return. You're going to need a nap after the launch, and you're going to be drunk on happiness. So I highly recommend you let someone else do the driving. And of course, the unauthorized resellers. There's honest ones. People's plans are going to change, especially if there's a scrub. There might be lots of tickets that go up for sale. And of course, there will be scalpers on eBay. But as I said, tickets were going for $600 before the Endeavour launch. Kennedy will honor tickets that you purchase through scalpers or second parties, if provided they're authentic, of course. They don't have a non-transferable fee, or they don't enforce it anyway. They want to be fair. Just a warning, if you're going to buy tickets through any of these sources, you have to have 3 things. You have to have a blue ticket, a green ticket, and a means of getting to Kennedy Space Center. So even either a parking placard for your car, that's what you get if you enter with KSC Lottery Direct, or you have to have proof of transport with Dolphin or Gator Tours. You can't take a cab to Kennedy Space Center. It doesn't work like that. There's a gate, and you have to either be on one of the company's tour buses or have a parking placard in your car. You can't take a taxi, you can't take a bike, you can't run out there. So if that is not included in a package that you're buying on the internet, you're being taken, and don't buy it. Just to give you an idea of prices that you can expect, I'm all for buying Canadian, but oh boy, there's no comparison. That's at about 2 weeks prior. And for flights, it's a bit of a risk management game. If you book too early, you may end up paying change fees as the launch date gets changed more than once. If you book late, prices are going to go up. If you book really late, you may fly to Orlando via Moncton, Dallas, Houston, and Charlotte. All of those stops on one flight. If you look at the pictures down below, those are just captures from Expedia, of course. The first one, I ran a search for this hotel on June the 7th, when there is no space shuttle launch. The second one is for July 7th and 8th, when there in fact is a space shuttle launch. So you'll see they must be doing some major renovations and improvements, because there's a 504% markup there. You won't be able, at this point, you won't be able to get a hotel in Titusville or out near Kennedy. So that's the good news. You won't be gouged like that. Orlando never runs out of hotels, though. It's the home of Disney and Universal. You'll always be able to find a hotel room there. And they don't gouge there around the space shuttle launches. They're driven just by normal tours and patterns, and tickets should be, or packages should be fairly good in July. So these are my big lessons learned. If you're determined to see the launch, don't plan a trip, the first trip, that will consume 100% of your budget. We ran at about 80%. We made it the Dream Disney Vacation. And when it scrubs, you're going to have to look in the mirror and see how badly you want to see the next launch. So I would plan to do it on the cheap. Disney will be there next year. Beware rock bottom prices that you get on some of the sites like Hotwire, because they have often no change clauses or exorbitant change fees. And again, you have to plan as if you're going to have to change your plans. And plan flight delays into your timings. The weather up the eastern seaboard of the US is notoriously tricky. Thunderstorms, tornadoes, and I know of several people that saw the launch from one of the New York airports who had tickets to be on our bus. Next one, this is a big one. If you take nothing else away, take this away. NASAspaceflight.com is the absolute best resource out there for anything space shuttle or spaceflight related. So if you are going to plan your launch, bookmark this site and start watching it right now. You'll hear everything you need to hear on that. NASA's good, obviously, but this forum is full of NASA insiders, USA contractors. It's the absolute best site. This is where I heard about the Astrovan and the U-turn. I was the first person on my tour bus to hear about it. Everybody else was still pretty excited. They're going to see the launch, and I just heard that there had been a scrub. So I did not deliver the bad news. I let someone else do that. But you're going to hear everything. There's a cheerleading thread if you just want to get in there and say, yay, go Atlantis. And lots of people do. Excitement builds. But number one best site on the web, bar none. And if you only follow one, follow this. And if you have wireless, take it with you on that day. There is good coverage out in the Causeway, and you'll rely on this heavily. Despite all your planning, the whole thing may still go pear-shaped. That is the sad truth. So I do recommend you make it about the journey, not just the destination, as much as possible. Get in the mood. These are great books to read to get in the mood. Riding Rockets by Mike Mullane. He's a really interesting guy. He was one of the original sort of Top Gun astronauts on the space shuttle program, and I'm pretty sure that he just became an astronaut, at least partially, to meet women. He's very forthcoming about a lot of things in NASA. He was a very good friend of Judy Resnick, who was killed in the Challenger disaster. Some interesting things there. And he saw the first class of women astronauts come through as well. It's a very good read. In contrast, Skywalking by Tom Jones, he was one of the later PhD astronauts, so he looks at things from a much more serious point of view, but you learn a lot of interesting things about how long it takes these guys to train for a single spacewalk. They can train for 1.5 years, only to have the door jam, and they don't get to do it. And that, in fact, did happen to him. He trained 1.5 years for a spacewalk. That didn't happen because the door froze shut. Heartbreaking. It's unbelievable, the commitment these guys have. A couple of good books about, of course, NASA's most visible failures, Challenger and Columbia. There's a lot of interesting information there. If you work in a large organization, you'll learn a lot about how an organization of otherwise smart people can plunge together towards the wrong decision. NASA engineers and contractor engineers in both these cases cried foul and said, don't do it. There's major problems. I recommend no. And management overruled, obviously, with disastrous consequences. Very good reading. And it will remind you that what you're going to see is not a movie. It's 7, or in Atlantis' case, 4 real human beings strapped on the back of a rocket. Another good one, October Sky, great family movie, and Apollo 13, of course. And this Discovery series of documentaries, I hadn't seen this before, When We Left Earth, and it follows right through. I can never remember it. Now I know. It starts with Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and Shuttle. Great documentary about all of them. And I should mention all these books and videos are available at the Ottawa Public Library. I have some of them right now out on loan, so you'll have to put in a request for a reservation, but I recommend you do. You can get all this stuff at no cost. So moving along, here we are awaiting launch at Kennedy Space Center. You have to go out. This is Orlando, home of Disney, remember? So once you get there, you're going to have to get in a big lineup. They have to do a pretty intensive security screening on everyone that goes through. Everyone shuffles into Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, and then they scan the tour buses while you're in there. They'll tell you a time to get on the bus to go out to the Causeway, and while you're doing that, you've got free run of Kennedy Space Center. So regardless of what time the launch is, everything's wide open and running, and there are big lines to get in everywhere. For us, it was an 8:56 in the morning launch, so it was surreal. We were out there starting at midnight, and right through the night. We went out to the Causeway at 5 a.m. It was surreal. It was beautiful, 25 degrees, full moon. It was surreal, the whole thing. You'll be given a time to get back on the buses, and what a lot of people do is they run and get in line so that when they're allowed to, they can be the first in line to get in line to go on the buses. And if you do that, that's great. You might be the first person on the bus. You'll then sit on the bus for 3 hours where the rest of the people wait in line to get on the bus. So I don't recommend you do that. That's what I did the first launch. I was stressed out. I didn't want to miss that bus. They won't leave without you. Enjoy Kennedy Space Center. It's amazing. There's your tourist photos that you have to do. Down in the left-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner, is the astronaut memorial. Pay tribute there. And in the right-hand side, Callum and I on our second launch attempt, trying to save a little bit of money, we packed our lunch to take with us. And that is, we had a picnic in the rocket garden. That's the business end of the Saturn V mock-up. Okay, best gift shop ever. Without a doubt, you can get anything there. Mugs, posters, t-shirts, prints, mission gear. You have to get a t-shirt. I would recommend you don't get I was there for the Atlantis launch t-shirt and then put it on, because if there's a scrub, the crowd may assume that you jinxed the launch, and it could turn ugly. Space Shuttle launch experience. It's not a Disney ride, but it is sort of a ride. Excellent. I do recommend you get on it. Get on it twice if you can. There's an explanation of the launch sequence by Charlie Bolden, an NASA administrator, followed by a launch simulation. If you picture shaking a penny in a tin can, that's sort of what it feels like. It's amazing, and it's supposed to be very realistic. So here we are out on the Causeway, and what I would recommend out on the Causeway, you got to establish your real estate. There aren't many bad views. It slopes down to the water, the Causeway, so everyone has a good view. It's like stadium seating. Just get yourself near a speaker because you can listen to the NASA Public Affairs officer speak in the background. And you can hear the astronauts doing comm checks. It's great. It's really educational, and you can follow the whole launch sequence. Without a doubt, someone will come along with a tripod camera, a tall one, and put it in front of you. But don't worry, there's plenty of space. While you're out on the Causeway, it is a nature reserve too. It's a funny couple of things to exist together, a rocket center and a nature reserve. These are some of the critters you might see. Lots of gators. We saw a dolphin. We saw what we thought was a sea monster, but it turned out to be a manatee. Lots of interesting things there. And the gators really are not that far from you, but they're pretty blasé about it down there. They have a rope barrier preventing the alligators from coming after you. So you just have to run faster than the next person, I guess, is the key. So when we get down to launch, unless you're a pro, unless you love photography, and I know there's a lot of great photographers here, don't fiddle with the camera, because what you don't get when you see that launch on TV is just how fast it's going. If you're fiddling with your camera, it could be gone before you know it, especially if there's a cloud layer like we had. It was only there for 25 seconds and then it was gone. So take the shot with the plume in the background. Try to get someone else to do it so your hand isn't in the picture. And that proves to your friends and family that you were there. We saw this, people cheered, people had tears in their eyes. We gathered our belonging. By the time we got back on the bus, a few minutes later, Endeavour was traveling 27,000 kilometers an hour and was just reaching orbit. It was incredible. Okay, stand by to squint and cover your ears, because this is a loud video. This goes for the video, and it goes for the launch experience at Kennedy Space Center, too. I was about 9 kilometers away, and my eyes were watering. I had to look away, and that was a daytime launch. So if it was a nighttime launch, it would be absolutely devastating to see. So if we can play this video. I can't get enough of those videos, and that's why I recommend don't worry too much about getting photos, because NASA puts out great photos, and there's lots of professional photographers at these launches that you can buy afterwards if you really want a souvenir. So it's gift time. From the astronomy point of view, this is something you might be interested in. The mission, of course, was to carry the alpha magnetic spectrometer to the space station. I'm not smart enough even to try to summarize what it does. I know antimatter, dark matter, beginning of the universe, and that's all I'm going to say on that. That's the mission patch, so that's designed by the crew. The shape of the patch is inspired by the International Atomic Symbol and represents the atom with orbiting electrons around the nucleus, in reference to Endeavour's cargo, the AMS. The burst near the center refers to the origin of the universe. The Space Shuttle Endeavour and ISS fly together into the sunrise over the limb of the Earth, representing the dawn of a new age, understanding the nature of the universe. And I have a final door prize here, which is one of the mission patches from Kennedy Space Center. I would like to give this out to one of the kids in the audience, so if you still have your bracelets on, maybe you could raise your hands so we can see where you are. I'm going to ask a trivia question, and the first person to shout out the right answer is going to take this home, okay? No, you can't be a kid, unless you're under 18. So I mentioned that Space Shuttle Endeavour was built to replace another space shuttle that suffered a very tragic end. What was the name of the space shuttle the Endeavour was built to replace?
Atlantis.
No, Atlantis is going up in June.
Challenger.
That's it. Come on up if you want. Good job. And again, I give that to you with the express hope that you'll keep the 2030s and the mission to Mars in mind. So if you still need convincing, remember, this is a risk. You may burn through a lot of vacation time and money and effort before you see a launch. You may not see it at all, but you may see it if you're lucky, and it's worth it. get chills every time I see that, and I see it a lot. That was made by NASA engineers, by the way, as a bit of a tribute. The full video is available online. And that's just to show you that engineers aren't all cold and analytical and without feeling. They feel pretty strongly about the space shuttle. In fact, they leave nothing to chance. And so since the first launch scrub that I told you about on 29th of April, when the Astrovan did an unfortunate turn, they've put in place new measures that should help prevent such unfortunate eventualities from the future Atlantis launch. So to the person who's going, you're in very good hands. And if there's any questions, you can ask me at the break or afterwards. I'd be happy to help you go to see Atlantis, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Roman. I'm a member of this center, but for the last 3 years, I've been living in Australia, in Canberra, where I've just completed a law degree. So, hence the title of the talk. Now, even though it's about the law, I'll try to keep this as interesting as possible and not bore you as much as law could be. This first slide, I kind of had this idea that I wanted to put, Libra and a nice constellation in the background and everything, and then I realized my computer doesn't have a proper editing program, so I just had to stick with this. All right, so this will just be an basic introduction to space law, which I've called Space Law, Law on the Final Frontier. So space may be the final frontier, but there's law up there. I mean, you could sort of be a bit poetic about it and say that Libra represents the scales of justice. Next slide. So there we have the constellation Libra. It may surprise many of you to know that there are actually hard and fast rules about space and what you can and cannot do in space. It sounds a bit unusual. I mean, we sort of instinctively think of space as sort of like the high seas, or really the final frontier, where it's unexplored, it's uncontrollable, it's completely, it's a no man's land. But there are rules, and a lot of these rules are actually quite old, old from the point of view of me talking up here. So to put that into perspective, I'm 28. So there are rules regarding exploration, use, that is, what you, like I said, what you can and can't do in space, search and rescue, and even for liability, for damage. So that's if a satellite crashes into another satellite or into another object. There are actually international rules which govern what you can, how much you have to pay, or who's liable for such damage. So I guess the point that I'm trying to get across is that space law is more than just the Prime Directive. It's governed by 5 treaties, and there are 4 principles documents, or sort of what I call them. They're documents which aren't legally binding international treaties, but which set out principles to which countries should adhere to, and these have been given by the United Nations General Assembly. So a bit of history. The traditional approach to space law, or to airspace law, I should be more specific, is that states had sovereignty and control on the air over their territory to infinity. So, or as I put it here, to infinity and beyond. You have, in theory, a country could claim control over airspace to the moon, to the sun, beyond into deep space. Now, obviously, to us that seems a bit absurd, and I suppose once space travel really got going, they really sort of realized that it was. The first comprehensive book on space law was actually written in 1932 by a guy called Vladimir Mandel. Later on, in 1959, so 2 years after Sputnik went up and the space race sort of really started, there was the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space that was formed by the General Assembly and was meant, and still exists as far as I know, to study space law, and to provide a forum for countries to discuss issues of space exploration. In the early 1960s, the United Nations General Assembly passed resolutions calling on space to be reserved for peaceful use and exploration. Richard, do you have a laser pointer around here somewhere?
It's right there.
Ah, thanks. I won't need it yet. All right, so the legal regime, as you can see up here, is all international law. So I won't get into technical details, but just take my word for it that it's governed by different rules than the laws of Canada or any other country. And a lot of it is done through the United Nations, and these are all United Nations treaties. So with space exploration and the space race, there was a need for legal norms to govern activities in space, and this created the first treaty. The first treaty was, it's called the Outer Space Treaty, but the full title is the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and Other Celestial Bodies. So that's all one word. That was, that's all one title, not one word. That was signed in 1967. So already the space race was about 10 years old, but you can see that there was already a need for legal norms, and there was a push to have sort of normalized space relations. Next slide. So here we have, this is a cartoon of, political cartoon of Lyndon Baines Johnson and the Soviet premier, who I think would have been Brezhnev at the time. And there you have the space pact, the space treaty that sort of left space for peaceful use. And of course, as many of you will know, there was some experimentation with nuclear weapons in space around that time. And although the space treaty sort of didn't really deal with that, that was dealt with other treaties. This sort of, the space treaty and the space treaties that followed were about limiting the use and eliminating the use of nuclear weapons in space. And in fact, nuclear weapons are now prohibited in space. The next treaties were the Astronaut Rescue Treaty in 1968 and the Liability for Damages Treaty in 1972. There are also treaties on registration of objects, so things that you intend to put into orbit, you have to register, and activities on the Moon and other celestial bodies. So activities, so the next moon launch, the next moon landing or the Mars landing, whenever they will be are governed by rules of international law. The statements of principles to which I mentioned earlier relate to some pretty specific things: TV broadcasting, remote sensing, nuclear power, and international cooperation. I'll spare you the quite boring details, but there are sort of three major features that each of these space treaties have in common. The first is peaceful use. Excellent. Oh, I particularly like this little cartoon. So peaceful use, international cooperation, and no claims of sovereignty. So in other words, no one country can claim jurisdiction over any object in space. You may have heard some talk about people trying to buy property on the Moon and Mars and stuff. And while that's private citizens aren't specifically mentioned, the space treaty set up a regime whereby states are responsible for the actions of their citizens. So it's unlikely and indeed impossible for someone to buy property on the Moon under the current regime. Most of these treaties that I mentioned have between 80 to 90 parties, so fairly well signed, and and each of them has about another 20 signatories. So those are countries which have signed the treaty but haven't yet ratified them. There are, however, some very sort of bizarre issues and some very important issues. The biggest single issue is what I've called the boundary issue, and that is that there's no agreement as to where space actually begins. Although we have this fairly robust set of treaties, we don't actually have a line at which we can say airspace ends and space begins. Now, this may seem a bit trite, I suppose. Well, I know who really cares. I mean, it's somewhere up there. But this is very important for things like the previous talk, the space shuttle. If the space shuttle is under the space limit, it's in airspace, which case it is subject to national jurisdiction. You'd have to get permission from the country it's flying over to fly it over.
Excuse me, Roman, there is actually a line, it's Because that's where astronauts are deemed astronauts when they cross over 50 miles altitude.
That may be true, but it wasn't in the books that I was
That
reading.
is
In
the
those.
line.
Oh, I was going to point that out because where'd you hear that?
No, that one's de facto. I don't believe it was ever agreed to.
It's not in law, but it's the only official boundary in that regard, is because you don't become an astronaut until you reach 50 miles.
Oh wow.
That's a US thing.
If it's a U.S. domestic law, then that could very well be true for U.S. domestic law. But I didn't read anything like that in the things in the treaties that I was doing. But to take your point, yes, if there's a specific line in international law, it's very important for the shuttle and for satellites. If it's in space, then it's not subject to national jurisdiction. You can fly it however you want. Next slide, please. So there are a few. There are a few possibilities there that have been put forward, aside from the American one. There's the aeronautical limit, which is the maximum altitude of an aircraft between 80 and 100 and 120 kilometers. So, where is it? 80 and, oh, how nice. It's about there. So somewhere in there. And so you split the difference and get about 100 kilometers. There's the von Karman limit, which is the aerodynamic limit. I'm not an engineer, so I don't really know what that means, but they put it at about 100 kilometers, so about there. There's the lowest perigee of orbiting satellites, which is 160 kilometers, so about here. And there was even a move to have a gravitational limit to define where space begins, but that's, according to my source, 327,000 kilometers towards the moon, but only 187,000 kilometers towards the sun. So there's a lot of variation, and there still is no agreement in international law as to what constitutes space, although the push is for about 100 kilometers, so sort of in that zone right here. It's been proposed several times, and it seems to be the way the trend is going, but there hasn't been any agreement yet in international law. Next slide. All right, that's a photo that some of you may have seen, and it just represents the number of objects in space, orbiting the Earth, debris and satellites. This liability in space for damage caused by space objects is governed by the Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects, like I said, signed in 1972. Objects in orbit hurtle through space at phenomenal speeds and can easily damage even robust things like the space shuttle. Everything is a missile. So if you go to the next. So that's a photo I took from the internet and shows damage to I think it's the reentry tiles caused by something impacting the space shuttle. This may seem pretty banal, but as anything in space, or to send anything in space, costs at least many millions of dollars. Liability can be huge. In a bizarre example, when Skylab fell out of the sky and landed in Western Australia, Esperance County in Western Australia fined NASA $400 for littering. Apparently NASA didn't pay up, although someone actually collected the money only a few years ago and actually did pay up the fine. But I mean, as anyone here will know, especially with the shuttle involved with potential loss of life, and anything that goes into space costs millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars. Compensation is actually a big issue and has been dealt with. There's the basic principle that there is total compensation, but there are some technical exceptions that I won't bore you with. Interestingly enough, I'll just mention this just before I sort of wrap up. There's still no definition of what constitutes debris. There's sort of the idea that once something has detached from its, the ship that it was attached to and has stopped functioning, it counts as debris. But that hasn't been, again, officially ratified in international law. So, and the treaties do discuss debris as a source of damage. But since we don't have a definition, we don't really know how that will operate. So there's still a long way to go in international space law. It needs a bit of a cleanup. As we can see, we need to define where space begins, what constitutes debris, and how we can best rectify the situations. I have a feeling, though, that space law will continue to grow as we continue to explore. If you want to learn more, there is a Center for Space Law at McGill University, while the universities of Nebraska, Mississippi, and Sunderland offer courses and diplomas in space law. And I'll just leave you on with this last little slide. I think sums it up very well. But that's my introduction to space law. Does anyone have any questions?
Were there any legal repercussions to that collision between those two satellites a few years ago that was really
There
remember there were
was.
two satellites a couple of years ago that collided?
Yes, there was. I think that was all settled in negotiations, though. I think they negotiated a settlement out of that. There have been cases dealing with like liability, but most of them are under contract law. And so that's something that, again, unless you take law classes, I won't bore you with it. But there have been. You're right, and I think there was something, but I think it was settled out of court before it got to court. I'm not 100% sure.
Roman, do you know if the families of the astronauts who died were able to make claims against NASA because of the poor decision making that caused that was responsible maybe for the orbiters not returning safely to the Earth?
The book I read, which was written in 2008, didn't specifically mention any, but that doesn't mean that they weren't able to get some form of compensation. Again, the book only mentioned cases that actually went to court. So if they settled with NASA out of court, or if there was a clause in the astronauts' contracts that changed liability, then it wouldn't have been in the book. It's entirely possible. I mean, there are aspects of law which you could use. I mean, I think how high up did Columbia break up? 58 miles. So pretty close to what could be space. It would depend on if it had broken up, let's say, within American airspace. Let's say it was solidly within American airspace. Then American tort law or contract law would govern that. But if it's in space law, then you could potentially get something under the liability for damages treaty. But I don't actually know that anything has come of that specifically.
Does space law apply to incidents like Cosmos 954?
Does space law apply to incidents of?
Cosmos 954, where the Russians scattered a nuclear reactor across northern Canada?
Yeah, that was mentioned. Yes, it did, because it happened, because it re-entered. And in theory, there's a whole discussion on this in the book. Like I said, I just wanted to give you guys a basic introduction. But it said that when such a thing happens, the country whose object that is, who originated that object, have the responsibility to recover it or pay for recovery costs. Again, there are technical exceptions, but generally, if it's the one I'm thinking of that I read about, the USSR had to pay something, or at least was liable to pay something. Whether they actually paid anything, I don't know.
I think they negotiated something like 10 cents on the dollar.
Could have been. That's entirely possible. Again, if you negotiate something out of court, I mean, it'll usually be binding once you do that.
Okay, well, we're running quite late on the program tonight, so I think I'm going to have to cut off the discussion and perhaps ask you to approach Roman after the meeting and discuss any further questions. With that, thank you very much, Roman. Okay, next up, we're going to have Graham Hay to talk to us about public outreach. Welcome, Graham.
Hello. Hello? Okay. All right, so about a month ago, we had the International Astronomy Day. Basically, Rasc had 3 events go on here. We had, during the day, we had solar observing. We had a star party after, once it got dark. And while the museum was open, we did have an indoor exhibit. I don't know what the control is for this. All right.
The right-hand button.
Right-hand button? Okay. All right, so for solar viewing, this is what the sun looked like for the day. I took this picture while showing somebody. Basically, we had set up outside. We had a couple telescopes. We had quite a large number of people come by, and a lot of excited people. For many, it was the first time they'd looked at the sun. using the proper equipment. Here's an example. Tilla is showing a father and his son how to use it. We were handing out like these solar glasses. So, you know, again, main thing is don't look at this. Okay, nice guys. I didn't put that in. All right, so moving on. So here we have a person here, one gentleman looking through a scope that has a filter on the front, so that you can look through it. So it's a regular telescope with just a filter. Attila had a more complex setup that I didn't really remember how it worked. We also had that same filter kind of concept on the Helen Sawyer Hogg Observatory. So that was open during the day and people could look at the sun using that. Again, this is, I think, 15-inch refractory? Yep, okay. Oops. Okay, so here's a picture of a couple people looking through the scope at the sun. And they also had this smaller scope for, I guess, the smaller people who didn't really want to go up all the way up there. And they had to look through the scope as well. And then inside the museum, we had our sort of normal whole bunch of stuff that we handed out. We had papers and flyers about like star charts and when the star parties were being held. We had these little solar wheels that we hand out that we had to make a lot of because every time we made them, somebody came along and took them. So we also have a little teddy bear that sort of showed up as well. Astro Bear. Astro Bear, yes. We also had several of the volunteers, because we had some sort of cloudy-ish weather dependent half the time, we had the solar scopes come inside and then pointed a picture of the sun on a far wall. Apparently some people thought that was a good joke. We also had this cast of the meteorite, starts with an A. Abby, yep. And I initially thought it was much lighter than it was, because apparently it's quite heavy. Okay, once the museum had closed and the sky had gone down, we did have a star party. It wasn't a very big one, because again, we had a lot of clouds, so we were basically looking at the moon in that, oh my goodness, there's the moon. 10 seconds later, it sort of wasn't there anymore, so it was like, look, okay, we're good. Next person. Wait, and go! So we had Eric here. Again, the observatory, well, here's this, and we also had this one here. They're seeing if they could get Saturn, but unfortunately the clouds in that area were less generous. We also had the observatory open, and I believe it's Tim who was running it that day, and we did get the moon at certain points, but as you can sort of see, you're sort of looking at it, then, you know, cloud, then you look at it again as the cloud moves along. And we did have a few people doing lunar observing with the 15-inch refractor. Again, special thanks to the Rasc volunteers. Hopefully they're all there. And I believe that's it.
Thank you, Graham. Next up, Mike will be talking to us about public outreach.
Hi everyone, a real quick update for what lies ahead for outreach events. Next slide, Chris. Okay, so we for those who are new tonight, we have a public observing program where members of our astronomy club and other clubs set up their telescopes for the and allow the and anyone, the public, to come and look through the telescopes. These are free events. We hold them in CARP. It doesn't look like it's going to happen tomorrow. The go-no-go decision on this event is going to be announced on that website there, the ottawa.rasc.ca. So if you're interested in attending, please check out that website, and you'll see an announcement. If you follow the link to the star parties, you'll see an announcement. These events are open to all. You don't have to have a telescope. If you do, that's great. Come, bring your binoculars, bring your eyes, whatever, and invite your family and friends and so forth. Next scheduled event is Friday, June the 24th, as you saw on there, and that schedule is posted on the web as well. There's another event I've mentioned in the past, Nuit Noir. that is held with the Cube Gallery on Wellington, and it's basically a celebration of the night sky and a lot of art, astronomy art. That's what will be offered there. Click, Chris. Oops.
Oops, sorry.
So what I've circled here is that our center is very, very actively involved in this event. So you can see a lot of names and so forth. There's going to be presentations, public star party. They're turning off some of the lights in the area as well. Okay, next slide. There will be a star party as well. As I said just a moment ago, the lights. The organizer of the Cube Gallery owner has arranged with the city to turn off. You may remember me telling you in a previous meeting, turn off some of the lights. So it'll be something. Hopefully, the event is July the 2nd, and there's a rain date. I think I had in the previous slide of July the 7th, Thursday, July the 7th. I am looking for somebody to help me with sort of planning or organizing this event, because it turns out I'm going to be out of town in the first 2 weeks of July. So if anyone is interested and available, let me know. I'm also looking for volunteers as well who are interested in bringing their telescopes and so forth. Several people have stepped forward. Next slide. Last thing I wanted to mention is that Stephen McIntyre is offering a night sky conservation presentation, he calls it, at the Mill of Kintail. It's very much like the Ottawa skies that we offer from time to time in our meetings. And we'll talk about the summer skies and what is to see and so forth. Those of you who've listened to Stephen McIntyre know that he's always prepared, he's always organized, he's very detailed. There's some information here on if the event is planned for Friday, June the 10th. If you want more information, you can actually just Google Mill of Night Sky Conservation Presentation at Mill of Kintail. And or if that doesn't work, contact me, and I'm happy to send you some information. All right, but again, Stephen McIntyre he's very thorough, and you're in for a treat. I think that's it.
Thank you, Mike. And next up, Rolf is going to give us a story about his recent adventures down south.
Okay, so in February we went to the Very Large Array. This is where it's located. I hope you can sort of make sense of that. The largest cities shown there are Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, and El Paso. So the nearest big place of any size is Albuquerque. I guess it's still over 100 miles away from Albuquerque. And zooming in some, so it's located in a very interesting place. It's surrounded by mountains, and it's called the Plains of St. Augustine, and it's at about an elevation of 7,000 feet and surrounded by even higher elevation mountains. So there is absolutely no radio reception in there, and of course cell phones don't work. The nearest place that you can stay might be Socorro, or a place here called Magdalena. It's very interesting. Socorro is at about 4,000 feet, and this plain is at about 7,000 feet. But it seems to be a very gentle rise when you drive up there, so it's not that noticeable. But when you're up there, it seems to be significantly colder. So that's your first clue. So here it is. And this triangle, or this Y, however you want to call it, is a series of railroad tracks along which they would move the antennas, because the antennas are movable and they can configure the array into different configurations. The other straight lines are highways. This is Highway 60, this is a paved road, and this is another paved road. So you can see it actually crosses paved roads, and there are railway crossings at both of these places. And you can stop at either one of those places and see the antennas fairly well. Now, we came there at night as well, and I set up here hoping to take some pictures, but it was terrible because this road is so long and this is so straight. You could see cars for many, many miles away, and it would take like 5 minutes before you'd start to see the headlights of a car, and by the time it would pass. So it wasn't very good for photography, but so eventually I set up here, and we didn't see a car at all. There were no cars coming down this, because that doesn't really go anywhere. So here's a close-up again, and these are all the administration and maintenance buildings, and there's a visitor center. It's a very busy spot. There's dozens and dozens of people there, and the visitor center is always open, and you can go in and take a walking tour of some of this area. And even in this shot here from Google Earth, you can see some of the antennas as well. So they are movable. Okay, so here's a light pollution map, and it's an extremely dark place, actually. This is the plains of St. Augustine, and the VLA is kind of just at the edge of the black zone, but it's extremely dark. This is probably one of the darkest observing places in North America. These other three places are other dark sky or clear sky clock locations on the light pollution map. So people have observatories in here. There's a lot of private observatories that people have set up in here because it is so dark. And that, of course, is Albuquerque up there. So yeah, so you'll see pictures of the very large array where you see a lot of antennas, but it's really hard to do that because they are movable, and when we were there, they were quite spread out, so it's really hard to get a picture of all of them, and this is sort of the best I could do from that vantage point. Here are those administration buildings, and the antennas kind of spread out.
Ralph, can I ask you something? You
Yes.
said it's a very dark sky there.
Yes.
These are radio telescopes. So how does light pollution correlate with radio telescopes? What is there any reason?
Oh no, it has nothing to do with that, but
Okay.
it's a very remote area, so,
Okay.
you know, they picked a remote high altitude
Being
spot
dark
that's,
sky has no consequence for radio telescopes.
no, but it's just a very remote site.
Okay.
So it's remote, far away from cities, which is what you want for radio, and it's also good for light pollution. So there was one vantage point where you could get there's 9 antennas on each arm, and for some reason these 9 were fairly close together, so some kind of an asymmetrical arrangement that they had that day. The sky was extremely clear. And these are the railway tracks that they move the antennas along. And so you wonder, well, how can they get these antennas lined up when it's such a bumpy railroad track? Well, they just use these tracks for moving them. They're actually set up, once they're on the location that they want, there's a series of pillars that they move the antennas to. So the antennas don't stay on these tracks. They set them on permanent piers. So they have a walking tour, and you can walk right up to one of these antennas. And you can see the pillars that it's mounted on, and that's the track behind it. That gives you some idea of the size of it. I think they're 80 or 100 feet, I'm not really sure.
I believe 92.
92 feet, there you go. What's amazing, though, is that these things are extremely noisy when you're standing near one of them. And you know, you think that, well, there's just a little motor moving these along, but it's not just that. There's all kinds of air conditioning equipment in there to keep the receiver cold. So I think that's what makes most of the noise. But there's all kinds of equipment in here making noise, and it's noisy in the daytime, but it's really noisy at night because there's no other sound, and when you're next to one of these antennas at night, it's pretty loud. This is the machine that they use to move it, and it's basically kind of like a railway transport thing. So they move along this track, and then there's a perpendicular track that they have some kind of a mechanism where they turn the wheels 90 degrees and move it up to where it sits on its pillars. And this is a building where they do maintenance on the antennas. Not unlike the vertical assembly building in Florida for the Kennedy Space Center. And I suppose this is, oops, I suppose this is the pillars that it would sit on. Okay, so this was looking sort of westward from one of the paved roads. This is not the paved road here, but I'm located on the paved road, looking down the array. And then we came at night, and I took a picture from the same location, and you can see the zodiacal light quite nicely, and the antenna is just pointed at Jupiter. So they must have been tracking Jupiter. And that's the zodiacal light without the antenna. This is looking sort of towards one of those the other paved road, and I don't know, it's maybe 8 miles away, and you can see the car headlights. The Andromeda Galaxy up here. And the antenna moved just a bit there, tracking the sky. And this is looking south, and this glow here would be from El Paso, several hundred miles away, and you can see that railway crossing sign there, and Canopus, some airplane trails, and the winter Milky Way. And last, this is not too far away, is the Trinity site, which is where the first atomic bomb was detonated, somewhere in here. This is about as close as you can get before you come to a guardhouse where they don't let you go any further. Twice a year, the Trinity site is actually open to visitors, and they'll take you right up to the bomb site. It's been about 65 years, so a lot of the radiation danger has passed. It doesn't show in this picture, but there are some sort of observatory-like buildings on top of this hill here, but I don't know what they observe. I don't think they observe the sky. And also, just down the road from this is a rock shop that sells trinitite. So if you want to buy trinitite is the rock that was melted at the atomic bomb site, and you can buy that as a souvenir if you want a little chunk of it. Okay, that's it.
I've heard people talk about trinitite before, supposedly green glass. But anyway, so that does it for the program for tonight. Thank you very much, Rolf. Great to see those different telescopes and the dark sky. Just a few business items before we finish. First of all, Estelle's Pick of the Month. So the idea of this little segment is to remind people there is the Stanmont Book Library, and members are welcome to borrow books from there. They're also, I might remind you, welcome to bring them back when they're done with them as well. We'd appreciate that. Estelle's Pick of the Month is Seeing in the Dark by Timothy Ferris. I believe you can check it out from the library tonight if it's open. Well, that's not up to me to find out. So next, please, Chris. So post-meeting, the book library, if the door is unlocked, will be open. Al, is the equipment library open? Okay, good enough. Coffee and conversation out front, provided by Art and Ann Fraser. Art can also be talked to about membership information. If you're expecting a membership card because you've renewed or you've joined, then Art's the person to see as well. He'll be the fella in the dark blue sweater with the, well, it's kind of warm for a dark blue sweater, isn't it? But normally he's got a sweater with Saturn on the back. See Stephen McIntyre if you're interested in the discounted magazine renewals. for members. Reminder, please, the rest of the museum is closed to the public, and that includes us. So please stick to the front area here. Don't go off wandering into the museum. As usual, the reservation's been made at Kelsey's. Some of the membership goes over there after the meeting for snacks and conversation. Next, please. Audience tonight, 101 people. Thanks very much to the organizers and speakers. You all know who you are. Your names are up there anyway. Thanks to our host, Canadian Science and Technology Museum. Good of them to provide us with this venue for our meetings. And any complaints or suggestions, anything else can be directed to me. My email address is at the bottom, bill.meeting.chair@gmail.com. Next meeting, a reminder, it is not the first Friday of the month in July, because of course July 1st is a holiday. It's the second Friday. So don't everybody come down here and then complain when we're not here. Okay. Other than that, have a safe drive home. Thank you all.